This is ancient Nazareth. It's a very old town. In fact, archaeologists have determined that Nazareth was settled sometime between 900 and 600 BC. And there are 4 archaeological sites in this town that support that claim. Today you're going to walk through some of the remains of the 1st century village of Nazareth. This particular site is right next to the Church of the Annunciation, the church that was built over the traditional home of Mary. And later on, in the Octagon project, we'll take you to some of the other ruins in Nazareth. What you're looking at here is a very small part of the village of Nazareth that Jesus knew. This is the town where he spent most of his life. We don't know exactly how many years he lived here because we don't know how young he was when he returned from Egypt. But in any case, most of his childhood and all of his early life was spent here. And the homes that you're going to enter on this tour are, more than likely, homes that Jesus himself was in at some time during his life. Now, why is Nazareth so famous? There are many reasons. This is the site of the Annunciation by the angel Gabriel to Mary. It's the place of Joseph's workshop. It is where Jesus spent most of his life with his brothers and sisters, and it's where he was educated in a nearby synagogue, which is also the place where he preached, and out of which he would eventually be escorted by an angry mob. And there is a cliff here where this angry mob tried to kill Jesus. There is a lot that took place in Nazareth. Now, during Jesus' time, Nazareth was an agricultural community that had a population that was probably no more than 500 people. It was a small village, and that's because there was very little water accessible to the community. Now, water was absolutely essential to life, and there are 2 ways that a town was able to get the water they needed. Either rainwater that the people captured and retained in underground water tanks, called cisterns, or by natural water sources like lakes, rivers, wells, or spring water which found its way above ground. The amount of water naturally available to a town always determined the size of the community, and this is primarily what kept Nazareth small. There just wasn't enough water to support a large population. Nazareth was not on any of the main roads that crossed through Galilee, and so it was always regarded as a backwater settlement, and it remained small until the age of modern irrigation. Now, there are some zealous critics who try very hard to prove that the Gospels are not historically accurate. And one of their arguments is that Nazareth did not exist in the 1st century, because the 1st century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus didn't mention it, nor is it mentioned in the Old Testament, nor did any Jewish rabbis write about it in the 2nd century. However, this argument is completely discredited when you realize several things. First, archaeologists have now unearthed 4 separate sites revealing 1st century dwellings in Nazareth. Secondly, there are 4 independent 1st century historians who all talk about Nazareth a total of 29 times. These historians all wrote biographies about Jesus, and we know them today as the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These books were not part of the Bible when they were written, and so they have to be regarded as separate histories prior to their canonization. All of these books were written within 1 generation after Jesus lived, and they support the claim that Nazareth was in fact a 1st century village. Thirdly, a Hebrew inscription found in Caesarea, dating to the late 3rd or early 4th century, mentions a priestly family who lived in Nazareth immediately after the year 135 AD. And fourth, after Jesus' ascension into heaven, history records that many of his nephews and great-nephews remained here in Nazareth, protecting the memory of those sacred things that took place in this town. We'll talk more about that in our tour of the Church of the Annunciation. So the idea that Nazareth was not a 1st century village is an overly zealous theory by amateur Bible critics that is not scientific, and one that has been completely dismissed by the academic community. Now, in the Bible, we don't have any history of Mary prior to the time that she was a young teenager, but we have reason to believe that she did not spend her childhood here. From the Proto-Evangelium of James, here is what we learn. Mary lived in Jerusalem until she was 12 years old. Her parents, Anne and Joachim, had probably died by this time in the city of Jerusalem. Mary then moved to Nazareth and lived for 4 years just a stone's throw away from here, in a grotto that is now the crypt of the Church of the Annunciation. During these 4 years, Joseph, to whom she was not fully married yet, was a craftsman or a builder in Sepphoris, which is a 45-minute walk from here. And when Mary was 16 years old, she received the Annunciation from the Archangel Gabriel that she would be the mother of the Son of God. Now, when you come to Israel for a live Octagon project tour, you can't actually enter these ruins, but you can do it right now in virtual reality with the Octagon project, and you'll experience things that normal tourists can't see. As you enter these ruins, you quickly learn that many of the homes in the ancient land of Israel backed up to caves, and this was good because a cave provided an inexpensive, secure, and cool dwelling for both people and animals. Now, these caves were not always very tall, and many times a normal-sized adult could not stand up in one. But still, it was nice to have a cave in your home, regardless of the size. The fact that this is a short room suggests that it was probably not the main part of the house, but rather it was used as a secondary or storage room or as a stable. And the pillars that you now see here were added later to provide support for the soft limestone ceilings. As you enter the largest of these caves, you'll notice that it has an oven. This means that for one or more families, this part of the house was a dwelling part, and that they cooked here. It wasn't a very tall room, and so the adults probably had to stoop every time they were in here. Now, in addition to being a kitchen, you will notice that this same room has 2 anchor holes carved into the walls. What were these for? Well, if this were a prison, these anchor holes would be used to chain prisoners to the wall so they couldn't get away. But this wasn't a prison, and so these holes were probably used for the purpose of securing animals, such as donkeys, goats, or sheep. Right now I'm going to take you into a special cave. This cave has a doorway in the back wall, and on the other side of this door is a staircase that leads down into the Grotto of the Annunciation, which is the traditional home of Mary and the place where Jesus was conceived. When you go inside the Church of the Annunciation, you will look into this cave, and in the back you will see a staircase leading up. Well, that staircase didn't exist in Mary's time. It was added many centuries later, and this is the outside door that leads down into that staircase. Now, I personally believe that Jesus was in one or more of these caves at some point during his life. Why do I believe that? Because Nazareth was very small, and Jesus lived here for about 27 years. In fact, there probably wasn't anywhere he hadn't been. Could it be that the steps you walk on to get down inside this cave are the steps that Jesus himself walked on? This is one of the greatest things about the Octagon project, and one of the greatest things about going to Israel on a live Octagon tour. Standing where Jesus stood, where he taught, and where he did his miracles.